There is a question that has two answers, and they have never fully agreed. Ask a geneticist where the Navajo came from, and you get a map. An arrow running south out of the subarctic. A language carried thousands of miles. A date sometime before the first Europeans arrived. Ask a dying elder the same question, and the arrow disappears. You get a story of emergence, of worlds ending and beginning again, of arrival in a homeland ringed by 4 sacred mountains. For most of the last century, the first answer was called history, and the second was filed under myth. This is not a story about who the Navajo descended from. It is a story about how long our certainty can outlast our evidence, and what happens when the evidence finally catches up. To understand the mystery, you have to understand what we thought we knew. The Navajo, the Diné, the people in their own language, hold the largest Native American reservation in the United States, a territory larger than the state of West Virginia, spread across the 4 corners of the American Southwest, and home to a few 100,000 enrolled members. Their language, Diné Bizad, is a kind of island. It is tonal and intricate, and it bears no meaningful resemblance to the Pueblo languages spoken right beside it. Its closest relatives live almost 2,000 miles to the north. The accepted history goes like this. The ancestors of the Navajo were Southern Athabaskans, part of a language family centered across northern Canada and Alaska. Sometime in the centuries before European contact, by most accounts around 1400 to 1500, though the date is genuinely disputed, they moved south. Their close relatives are the Apache. Their distant linguistic cousins, the Diné, still live in the Yukon. The migration story fit the linguistics. It fit loosely a tradition of a long journey, and for decades it was treated as more or less finished. But there was always a friction, a small, persistent thing the tidy version could not quite hold. Because the Dain did not simply arrive and settle, they arrived and transformed. After contact with their Pueblo neighbors and Spanish colonizers, they built a pastoral world around sheep and horses, animals that reached the Southwest only after 1600. They mastered the upright loom and made of it a weaving tradition the world would come to recognize on sight. They learned silverwork and turned it into something unmistakably their own. They wove Puebloan elements into their ceremonial life. The older telling had a word for all of this: borrowed, as if a people could be assembled from other people's parts. But that is not what the evidence shows, and it is not what the Dain say. Every living culture takes in what surrounds it. English borrowed half its words, and no one calls the English hollow. What the Dain did was not collection. It was synthesis. They did not merely adopt the loom and the flock. They made them Dain, and they kept the receipts. The clan system openly records the Puebloan and other families absorbed into the people generation by generation. That is not a culture hiding its seams. That is a culture telling you exactly how it was made. So the friction was never that the Navajo borrowed. It was that the simple migration arrow could not explain a people this layered. Then the geneticists arrived. The first studies in the 1990s read mitochondrial DNA, the genetic material passed down only through the mother's line. On the surface, it confirmed the expected. The maternal lineages pointed back, as they do across the Americas, through Beringia, the drowned land that once joined Siberia to Alaska, and ultimately to Northeast Asia. Clean, continuous. The migration model vindicated. But the deeper geneticists looked, the less simple it became. And here the popular versions of this story start to go wrong. So this is the part to get right. The maternal line tells one history. The paternal line, read off the Y chromosome, often tells another, not just for the Navajo, but for many native nations, because the centuries after contact rewrote the male lineages far more than the female ones. These two streams pointing in two directions is not a contradiction. It is a record of two different fates, of mothers and of fathers written into the same genome. And the larger discovery, the one that actually overturned the textbook, was not about the Navajo at all. It was about everyone. For a long time, the founding of the Americas was imagined as a single event. One people, one wave, one crossing. The genetics broke that. Researchers found the Americas were peopled in more than one stream, and that the Diné peoples, the Diné among them, traced to a distinct, later movement than the very first arrivals. There was also evidence that the founders did not simply rush across Beringia and keep going. They appear to have paused there, isolated, for thousands of years, the Beringian Standstill, long enough to become genetically their own thing before the land opened south. So the founding population was never one tidy group. It was plural and old and stranger than the map allowed. Which brings us to the twist, and to the place where almost every viral version of this story lies to you. You may have heard that a mysterious deep signal called Population Y turned up in the Navajo and rewrote their origins. Population Y is real. It is a faint, ancient trace with affinities to Australasian peoples, Indigenous Australians, and Papuans, and its nickname comes from Ipiquera, a Tupi word meaning ancestor. It is one of the genuine enigmas of American genetics. But it was found in the Amazon, in South American populations, the Surui and the Caritiana, thousands of miles from the Four Corners. In a different language family, a different world, it has not been established in the Diné. The real twist is not that this signal hides in the Navajo. The real twist is that it exists at all, in this hemisphere, in anyone. It is proof that the founding of the Americas carried threads no one predicted. That is the honest version, and notice it loses nothing. The story still ends bigger than it began. It just refuses to put words in the genome's mouth. Imagine standing in the Chusca Mountains, on the eastern edge of the Navajo Nation, on a clear November morning. Above 9,000 feet, the air cold and dry and full of pine. Below you, the red rock country of the Colorado Plateau runs out in every direction, impossibly wide. The Diné have a word, Hozho. It is usually translated as harmony or balance or beauty. But the translation is too thin because the word holds all three at once. It names a state in which everything stands in right relationship, the world as it should be. I kept thinking about that word, reading the genetic studies. The researchers were hunting for Hozho in the data, a clean tree, a single line of descent, a story with a beginning and an end you could hold in one hand. And the data kept refusing, not because it was wrong, but because a human history is not a tree. It is a web. People moved and merged and split and moved again across tens of thousands of years, leaving traces in one another the way a river leaves its mark in stone. The scientists wanted a clean answer. The data kept offering something more honest, complexity without resolution. And that matters far beyond the Navajo. We have a deep need, understandable, maybe unavoidable, to make human history legible. These people came from there. They are related to those. The lines run thus. The map is knowable. What 2 decades of genomics have shown with growing clarity is that the need for a clean map was always partly a fiction, not a cruel one, just a simplification that served our hunger for a story more than it served the truth. The Navajo are not only Southern Athabaskans, they are not only the endpoint of one migration from the north. They are also the people who say, in their own account, that they came from the east, from emergence into Diné, between the four sacred mountains. This is a memory the messier science gives us less reason to dismiss, not more. They carry, like every population on Earth, layers, written and half erased and written again, reaching back to the first human footsteps in the Americas, to movements older than any writing, to people whose names are gone and whose story now survives only in the language of DNA. Every people is a palimpsest. The Navajo are not unusual in that. They are simply one of the histories we have finally, slowly begun to read. And what that reading reveals is not a smaller people, it is a larger one. The Navajo were never what the old story said, not because the truth diminishes them, but because the old story was too small. The roots run deeper and in more directions than the map ever showed. That is not a mystery solved. It is a mystery enlarged, which is in the end the only honest place the science can take us.